Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So happy to have you two here.
Thank you.
American Factory, was not only a powerful work of journalism, it really was a beautiful work of art. I mean, it's
Thank you.
Shot beautifully. By the way, how many have seen the film?
American Factory?
Okay. American Factory.
Oh,
well, it's
no.
available on Netflix, and I'm sure many are going to want to see it after we finish. But let me start by asking you, explain a little about the project and why you came to it. Why did you feel the need to make this film?
Why don't you start?
We live in Dayton, Ohio. We're very proud to be from that small, scrappy town. 10 years ago, we had a GM plant, huge GM plant. At one point, 6,000 people worked there, and it closed. And we made a film about that called The Last Truck, Closing of a GM Plant. That film was on HBO, and when that film was over, we thought we would never go back into that factory. That factory sat empty like a dead, huge dragon in our town for years. And then a Chinese billionaire entrepreneur, Cho Tak Wong, bought that factory at the end of 2014, and in early 2015, hundreds and then 2,000 Americans started getting hired to work there. It's now Fuyao Glass America. They make automotive glass, windshields, and we were curious, and we were also invited in to tell the story of this rebirth of this factory.
What surprised you? I mean, you obviously had lived in this community. You filmed this community. Now you're doing a new act in this community. What surprised you most in the making of this movie?
Gosh, there were so many things. I would say, after The Last Truck, people were really devastated in our town for years. There were no jobs, or there were jobs that paid $8 an hour, $9 an hour, no benefits. Seasonal.
Yep.
Plants close, all that. So what surprised us was the enthusiasm and the sense of hope and the sense of curiosity of those blue-collar Americans, both black and white, we're going to make this happen. This is a startup. Okay, it's rough. Okay, it's $12 an hour. But the benefits are good. The jobs are going to become good. And what surprised us was watching, which you see in the film, the sort of arc of that story, the curiosity, the interest, the sense that we can make this happen, we can make the cultural coming together happen, and then how it all sort of, for various reasons, eroded and eroded.
One thing as a viewer that surprised me was the access that you had. I mean, it is extraordinary. You are in the room when they are castigating Senator Sherrod Brown for promoting the union at the opening ceremony. You are there when the chairman, the entrepreneur of the company, says, "I will shut this place down
if the union comes
if
in."
The union,
yeah, right.
And you are there. I mean, it is extraordinary behind the scenes. A portrait of this from 360, from the worker perspective and from manager. How did you get that kind of access and maintain it?
Let me answer that. Okay. Well, I'm glad you actually brought that up because it was really amazing to us too. It's to the credit of the chairman, who's a guy exactly my age. He's 73. He came over from China and wanted to start a factory in America and didn't really know how hard that was going to be, actually. But anyway, early on, he was asked, he saw The Last Truck. He respected it. He was asked by some of our city fathers, how about having a documentary crew in there to follow this historic rebirth of this dead plant? And he's kind of a maverick. He said yes. And to his credit, he never took that back, even when things got rough, even when we filmed things that really made a lot of the management's butts probably tweak in their seats.
I would say time is also the biggest factor. Because we live in Dayton, we're not flying in from LA or New York once a month or once every 2 months. We were there hundreds and hundreds of times.
Oh, wow.
There were like weeks and weeks where we were there every day, long days, filming. And when you're on the inside of a story, even as things get hard, the people who are trusting you at some point or other, they say, like, you're on the inside of this. Yeah, that went wrong today.
Yeah.
And you were there. I saw you filming that, or I said that thing I probably shouldn't have said. But, you know, you're here a month ago, you're here yesterday, you're here tomorrow. You're kind of on the inside of it.
Oh, and we should point out that we had 3 conditions. One is we would take 0 money from the company, so it was a completely independent film. We had complete editorial control. They had no say over it. And we had full access.
Well, you know, one of the things you document is just the enormous gulf in expectations between the American workers and the Chinese workers about what constitutes a fair balance between work life and family life. When you go to China, you meet workers who are living away from their home community and might see their kids, I think one said once or twice.
Once a year.
Once a year.
During New Year's.
That is clearly what management was accustomed to.
Right.
Was it just a recipe for, I mean, was there any way to overcome that gulf?
No one had any idea how big the gulf was until the rubber hit the road, you know. The fact that the Chinese expected to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and often 7 days a week in Ohio, whereas the Americans are like, you're kidding me. I'm making $12 an hour. I'm not going to work 12-hour days. I'm not going to work 6 days a week. I got kids. I got to pick up my kid. So on paper, I think everyone had such hopes and goodwill, but once the reality hit, the differences were very stark. I do want to say, though, that making the film really opened our eyes. I think it helped us try to get out of a stereotype of what Chinese workers are like. We realized making the film, watching and filming with Chinese folks in Ohio and going to China, that, you know, they're questioning this 12-hour days, just as American workers 80 years ago in the shirtwaist industry or wherever, they were questioning 12-hour days, you know, and
we had to fight for that.
It's just we are on very different trajectories,
right.
You know. I mean, you've seen the industrial Midwest on a downward trajectory, jobs leaving, plants closing. In China, it's just a remarkable 30-year rise, and there's a real sense of, we felt a real sense of energy and mission. It was like, I'm going to sacrifice. Yeah, I will work for now. I will work these long weeks and long days, but I'm not, you know, the plan is not to do that forever.
You know, well, I feel like I'm slightly in the review spoilers ahead.
No, don't do it.
I don't want to give spoilers, but I want to say, certainly a central narrative thrust of the whole film is the attempt to unionize the plant, which is intently resisted by the Chinese management. What did you take, and I'm not going to give away, no plot spoilers about how it turns out, what did you take away from that entire conflict and what it says about the Gulf that Steve was just talking about?
I have to say, we learned a lot from that. Yeah, there was a very intense union battle that developed. We had no idea at the beginning. This was not our sense of what the story was going to be. We had no agenda going in. What we started noticing were these people called union avoidance consultants. You've heard of those. Okay, well, we didn't really know about that. Even though I'm from a working class background, my dad was a union man, you know, but that was in the days when you were loyal to your company and the company took care of you, right? This is not so much the case anymore. So they brought in teams of union avoidance consultants, up to 5 at a time, over more than a year. In the film, you see it sort of more for a short period. And what we saw is that the intense messaging, the very confusing messaging, the scary messaging, especially for a lot of the younger workers who had no clue what a union was, you know, that's a lot been broken in American culture, the connection with good union jobs. We also noticed that the company started to fire people who were out front, union supporters. But I will say, you mentioned the Chinese did this. Actually, they learned it from the Americans. This is not a Chinese thing to fight a union, necessarily. There are plenty of Chinese companies.
Clearly, the union in China was the brother-in-law of the
right. That's a whole other thing.
Of the chairman. That was not a union in any meaningful sense.
Not in the sense we think of it. No, although it is meaningful, but not in the way we think of it.
Did you get a sense of why the chairman says, "I will shut it down"?
He did.
If there's a union.
I think he was angry.
Where was that coming from?
I think he was just upset, and he was berating his top management. That was in a closed-door meeting with his top management. He never actually said that publicly. Not that he should have said it.
Right.
And there are people who specifically fired positive union workers.
Right.
But in the end, I feel like there was an intense campaign to fight the union. And you see the results of you see what happens in the movie.
You know, in the last 2 years, the last 3 years now, in the Trump presidency, there's been an enormous increase in tension with China, tariff wars back and forth, questions about what that means for the global economy. What does it mean for this plant? How has the tensions affected, and the tariffs? Presumably they're bringing in a lot of inputs from is it struggling as a result?
No, I mean, in fact, the chairman seems prescient now that he set up shop in Ohio because he's not paying tariffs on all this.
You remember
glass.
he predicted the weather?
In the movie.
He predicted the weather for the opening ceremony. He said,
right.
It'll be nice.
And he must have predicted this whole warfare. Because
the conflict between Trump and China is not affecting...
there are people who in the plant who are Trump supporters. There's so many amazing contradictions that we saw. I mean, we filmed pro-union workers who were very pro-Trump. And they said, we need a union because a union will fight for us. And that's what I think Trump will do. And we saw Chinese communists really anti-union because, I guess workers shouldn't have collective power. There was all these layers of irony and complexity to it that was really fascinating. But I don't know, on the floor, I feel like the tensions on the floor are interpersonal, and global stuff has not yet been a factor.
By the way, Slido, questions have you got for Stephen and Julia? Let me ask. I do want it because certainly I've been covering national politics since the early 1980s, and we have never had a point where there are more people obsessing about understanding the psyche of working class white people in the Midwest and the choices they make. You have spent a lot of time with people on the floor. Yeah. What do you think drove so many of them to vote for Trump, and do you think that's still solid?
I do. I think people are very disappointed. People are very beaten down. People wonder, when am I going to have a secure life again? Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, and probably a lot of you, we had vacations. We owned a house. Yeah. All these workers, had a decent life. They could send their kids to college. That was true up until 10 years ago. It didn't get that much better. I mean, so you're not making starvation wages, you're making $12, $14, but you can't buy a house, you can't take a vacation, you can't travel. I think people felt very much like the economy was not working for them in the Midwest. And I think still feel that way.
In fact, we know a lot of people who voted twice for President Obama and then voted for President Trump. Because of hope. Because of desire for someone to get in there and reverse the tide.
And shake things up,
Let's show, do we have a clip? I think we have a clip. We have a clip of one worker talking about.
So this is Jill from the movie.
When GM closed, I foreclosed on my house.
Yeah, I don't know if we can see it that way.
Ever since then, I have struggled to try to get back to middle class again.
We need the picture.
Oh, there it is.
There it is.
I've been living in my sister's basement.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go.
She's been living in her sister's basement. She used to own a home.
I am fortunate enough to have a bedroom. And the only thing in here is my end tables and my TV. The bed isn't mine. The bed is theirs. So, yeah.
So when Jill worked at General Motors, she was making like $29 an hour, roughly a little over $50,000 a year. She could have a decent life. When she started at Fuyao, she's making $12 an hour. That was $26,000 a year.
And 10 years later.
And 10 years later, if you're in your 40s and you have a kid or two kids, you can't live on $26,000 a year. The fuel for this political turmoil in the Midwest, I think, has a lot to do with that. Because we're talking thousands and thousands of people in the same boat of wanting to have a decent life again and no one being able to get it for them.
And the jobs that are available, yes, there are more jobs. We have lower unemployment. But there's still the Payless shoes, with the gun where you read things, or their call centers. And the wages are just depressed. At least in our experience, the wages are really depressed of working class people who don't have necessarily a college education. We have to worry about that.
Did you come out of this thinking, I'll ask it differently. Most of the movie is about the cultural, social conflict between the expectations of the Chinese ownership and the expectations of American workers, and all the way that plays out. And then I feel like I'm watching a science fiction movie where it turns out that the two sides are now suddenly facing an even bigger threat at the end, where you kind of, again, not to give away plot points, but toward the end of the movie, you begin to introduce the idea that there may be a bigger challenge to the economic prosperity of these blue-collar workers in this factory. Why don't you talk a little bit about what that is, and at what point in the film really became a concern?
He's talking about automation.
Yeah, Ron, you're talking about robots.
Automation.
The robots taking over.
Right.
There's a scene near the end of the
Terminator
film.
moment in the final minutes of the
the factory always had a lot of robotic arms, moving glass, moving windshields, and as you see the film go on, there's a scene near the end where management is really talking about getting rid of workers here for robots, getting rid of workers there for robots.
4 there.
And the chairman publicly has talked about how automation is going to be a big part of the future. And we all know there's been a lot of studies that literally like 375 million people around the world are going to lose jobs in the next, something like the next 15 years because of automation. We wanted in the film to raise that issue. We didn't feel it would be right to ignore it, but we also didn't want to go too deep into it. So we have this.
What's happened since? What's happened since?
Well, but we think of it as an opportunity. I mean, you could think of automation as an opportunity for people not to break their backs and have repetitive stress injuries the way almost all those GM workers we followed did. So it should be an opportunity, but it depends where we put the resources of our country. It's kind of like, what kind of country do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a country where a huge amount of our population doesn't have good jobs and is up for grabs? I mean, we all know there's a struggle going on for the heart and soul of America, and that struggle is playing out in the Midwest.
And we have a question. Let me ask the question real quick. What can small businesses in rural towns do now for their workforce challenges, rather than waiting for long-term economic development programs to have impact?
I don't know.
Yeah.
What could?
I have a variation of that question. I'm
sorry.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
We do live in a small town, but I don't know what to say.
Well, I mean, did you come out of this movie thinking that equity and fairness requires figuring out another $29 an hour factory job for the people who used to be employed in GM, or did you come out thinking there just is not enough of that work that's going to be there, and ultimately these people have to do something else or somewhere else? What did you come out thinking?
I came out thinking, hey, the billionaire class is growing and growing around the world. Wages are being stagnant. Let's not look at just the workers and say, what are you guys going to do? What are the billionaires going to do? Really, what are the millionaires and billionaires going to do? I mean, let's talk about sustainability of our country, but also of our globe, right?
The only metric,
let's look at the...
If the only metric is shareholder return, we're not going to have a just or decent society. And if we have other metrics, like decency to the community in which your business is based, or environmental responsibility. If we could somehow figure out other measures and have some teeth to them, like the B Corp folks are trying to do, then maybe there's a path. But it's.
I also don't think
it's not going.
I don't think unless we can strengthen labor laws, that we are going to have a collective voice of workers, which would be through unions and other forms. I'm a great believer that workers need a seat at the table. When we talk about automation, it shouldn't be companies talking about automation. It should be workers talking about automation, too.
And there's a question to that point. Congrats on a great film. What did you learn or observe about building a solidarity across cultural barriers? What it takes, what
keeps from happening? Nationalism.
Divides.
You saw the film. Nationalism tends to divide people, and the Chinese appeal to nationalism. The Chinese owner.
You're better than them, he says. They say
exactly, and other things. We're all Chinese. We're born of Chinese mothers, but also we get those appeals too. To nationalism. We're the best country in the world. I think nationalism is one of the things that keeps working people feeling like they can't work together, that keeping them apart.
But you did show examples of the Chinese workers and the American workers.
Yeah.
Not necessarily management, workers.
Right, on the floor.
Blue-collar
building
workers.
solidarity.
Yes,
going out,
absolutely.
hanging out with each other, going to barbecues, going fishing.
Shooting.
No, shooting
guns.
Harley
Right.
Davidson.
Blue-collar workers found
could be
ways
more
to get
American?
together. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
can I ask you one? Go ahead.
But I want to say there's a growing labor movement in China. And, there's sites like China Labor Bulletin where you can track labor agitation and unrest. People are standing up. So it's in a way, it's like as global capital is organized, global labor is not. But maybe someday it will be.
A final question. One of the many notable things about this film is that it is the first film of the Obama's production company. Tell me a little bit about how that came to be and your understanding of why they wanted to be part of this extraordinary movie.
So, thank you. The Obamas took on the film when it was all done, so they had nothing to do with the making of the film. Their company is called Higher Ground. You can look it up, Higher Ground Productions. I think they look to champion books, movies, TV shows that take the higher ground. I think one of the things about our film is that it's pretty fair to everybody. The owner, the management, the blue-collar Chinese and Americans. I think they like that. I also think, they both come from humble beginnings. Yeah. They're both great storytellers. They've written great books. I think they like the idea of average people, average working people being up on the screen. Midwesterners, they're both,
community organizer in the
there you go, yeah,
steel part of Chicago, right?
But we're really lucky that they chose this film as their first release because we're lucky that Netflix has the film because it's in 191 countries, translated into 27 languages,
it's
and
amazing,
then with Higher Ground and the president and the first lady having promoted the film, it just helps get the film out there.
There's even a little movie of us with them that you see if you watch it on Netflix. Did you see it?
Absolutely. I'm guessing we're going to have a few more people in this audience who are going to see this film now that we've had this conversation. Steve and Julia, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.